At 3:17 a.m., Clara Voss woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. Her heart sank when she saw the caller ID. Eleanor. Her estranged sister hadn't spoken to her in years, not since Eleanor returned to their hometown of Harrow Vale, that cursed spit of land clinging to jagged cliffs and endless waves. But this wasn't a call, it was a voicemail. Clara pressed play, her hands trembling as static crackled through the speaker. Eleanor's voice emerged, barely audible over what sounded like rushing water. "Clara, you have to come. They're watching me. The mark, it's here, on my neck. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dug. The water, it's rising." The line cut off abruptly, leaving only silence. Clara stared at the screen, her mind racing. What mark? Who was watching? And why did Eleanor sound so terrified? She tried calling back, but the number went straight to voicemail. The next morning, she booked the last ferry to Harrow Vale, ignoring the warnings about rough seas and bad weather. As the boat chugged through the midnight waves, Clara opened Eleanor's journal, which had arrived in the mail days before the call. Its pages were warped with moisture, the ink smeared as if soaked and dried repeatedly. The entries began innocently enough. Notes about the town's history, strange disappearances, old legends, but grew increasingly frantic. One phrase repeated itself: the Hollow King. By the time the ferry docked, Clara's stomach churned, not just from the choppy waters, but from the suffocating sense of dread that settled over her like a shroud. Harrow Vale greeted Clara with a wall of mist so thick it swallowed the moonlight whole. The streets were eerily silent, save for the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. Even the air felt wrong, too heavy, too damp, as if the entire town were drowning in its own atmosphere. Sheriff Gray met her at the docks, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. "Your sister's gone," he said flatly. "Been missing for days. Best leave it be." His tone was dismissive, but Clara caught the tremor in his hand as he adjusted his belt. Something about this place scared him. Eleanor's cottage sat on the edge of town, perched precariously close to the cliffs. Inside, the stench of brine and decay hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Papers were scattered everywhere, newspaper clippings, maps, photographs. But one image stood out, an old family photo of their mother, her palm carved with a spiral symbol identical to the one in Eleanor's journal. Clara's skin prickled as she flipped through the pages. One entry stopped her cold. "They're not ghosts, they're alive, under the church, the Hollow King." And then she felt it, a coldness creeping up her neck, like fingers brushing against her skin. When she checked the bathroom mirror, her blood ran cold. There, faint but unmistakable, was a bruise-like spiral etched into her flesh. The spiral wasn't just a bruise. It pulsed, throbbing faintly as if alive. Clara scrubbed at it with soap and water, but it wouldn't fade. Panic bubbled in her chest. Was this connected to Eleanor? To the Hollow King? She spent hours poring over Eleanor's notes, piecing together fragments of a story that made no sense. According to local legend, every 100 years the sea demanded a sacrifice. A bearer, chosen to host the Hollow King, an ancient entity that dwelled beneath the waves. Those who bore the spiral were marked for the ritual. Their bodies would be drowned in salt water, their souls consumed by the king. Clara's mind raced. Had their mother been a bearer? Was that why she drowned herself when they were children? And now Eleanor and Clara herself were being targeted. That night, the dreams began. She found herself underwater, surrounded by shadowy figures with glowing eyes. They whispered in a language she couldn't understand, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of clicks and hisses. At the center of it all stood a throne made of black coral, and seated upon it was something vast and incomprehensible. It turned its gaze on her, and she woke screaming, soaked in sweat despite the chill in the air. The next morning, Clara ventured into town, determined to find answers, but the locals avoided her like a plague. Old Mrs. Byrne at the market slammed the door in her face when Clara mentioned the Hollow King. Fishermen muttered darkly about tides and offerings. Even the librarian refused to let her near the archives, claiming they were closed for renovations. But there was one person who didn't turn her away. Silas, the lighthouse keeper. He lived alone atop the cliffs, his tower a crumbling relic of another era. His hands shook as he poured tea, and his eyes darted nervously toward the sea. Every century, he whispered, the tide demands a bearer, a soul to host the Hollow King. Your mother, she was supposed to be his vessel, but she fought, drowned herself before the ritual could bind her. He nodded at Clara's neck. You and your sister, you're next. Clara's throat tightened. Why us? Silas hesitated, then leaned closer. Because your bloodline is sacred. King feeds on purity. Your mother's death disrupted the cycle. Now the tide's rising again, and it's hungry. That night, Clara broke into the town's stone church. Beneath the floorboards, she found a hidden tunnel leading deep underground. The air grew colder with each step, and the walls were adorned with carvings of spirals and writhing figures. At the end of the tunnel lay a cavern filled with bones. In the center stood an altar, and chained to it was Eleanor. She was alive, but her eyes were black voids, her voice a chorus of whispers. You're too late, she hissed. The tide's already in your veins. Before Clara could react, torchlight flooded the cavern. The cult had found them. Reverend Hale led the procession, his Bible clutched like a weapon. The king requires a pure host, he intoned. Your mother's bloodline is sacred. Eleanor failed him. You won't. Clara struggled as they dragged her toward a tidal pool, the spiral on her neck burning as if branded into her flesh. Eleanor's laughter echoed through the cavern. With a strength that snapped chains, she lunged at Hale, teeth sinking into his throat. Run! She screamed, but her voice was no longer hers. Clara fled, the sea clawing at her heels as the storm surged. Back in the lighthouse, Eleanor convulsed, seawater pouring from her mouth. It's too strong, she gasped. The mark, you have to drown me. Fresh water, before the tide peaks. Clara hesitated, tears blurring the spiral on her own skin. I'm sorry, she whispered, pushing Eleanor into the river below. The mark faded. The nightmares stopped, or so she thought. Weeks later, Clara recorded a podcast detailing Harrow Vale's secret. Listeners claimed her voice wavered in the final episode, as if shadowed by another's whisper. Clara convinced herself that drowning Eleanor had ended the nightmare. The spiral on her neck had faded, and for a time she believed she was free. But the whispers returned, not in dreams this time, but in waking moments. She'd hear them when standing near running water, a faint chorus of gurgling voices, speaking in that same alien tongue. At first, she dismissed it as trauma or guilt manifesting in strange ways. But then came the visions. Shadows moved where no light existed, forming shapes that resembled figures from her nightmares. The blackened throne, the glowing eyes, the endless waves. One night, while recording her podcast about Harrow Vale's secrets, Clara paused mid-sentence. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Do you hear that?" Her listeners did. Thousands reported hearing distorted audio beneath her words, clicks, hisses, and a low guttural laugh. Some claimed they could make out Eleanor's voice saying, "It's not over." The comments section of Clara's podcast exploded with messages from people claiming to know more about the Hollow King. One user, going by the name Watcher, wrote, "You shouldn't have left Harrow Vale. He always finds his bearers. You're marked now, whether you see the spiral or not." Clara tried to ignore it, but Watcher kept appearing in every thread, leaving cryptic warnings. Finally, she responded privately, demanding answers. Watcher sent her a single image, a photograph of her mother standing on the cliffs of Harrow Vale, her palm clearly bearing the spiral. Beneath it was scrawled, "She thought she escaped too." That night, Clara dreamed of her mother's death, not as an accident, but as a deliberate act of defiance against the tide. She woke screaming, her sheets soaked again, the spiral faintly visible once more. Clara received another voicemail, this time from an unknown number. The voice was Eleanor's, but warped, layered with others. "You can't run, Clara. You're part of the cycle now. Come back to the lighthouse." Against her better judgment, Clara returned to Harrow Vale. The town felt different, emptier, darker. Fog blanketed everything, and the streets were deserted. Even the sea seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. When she reached the lighthouse, Silas was gone. In his place was a journal filled with frantic scribbles. It's using her. It's using them all. The king doesn't just take hosts, it spreads. Silas's notes revealed that the cult hadn't disbanded after Eleanor's death. Instead, they had grown stronger, recruiting new members who bore the spiral. Their goal was clear: to complete the ritual and fully awaken the Hollow King. Clara discovered their meeting place, a hidden chamber beneath the church where she'd found Eleanor. Inside, she stumbled upon a horrifying sight. Dozens of townsfolk gathered around an altar, chanting in unison. At the center lay Hale's body, preserved in salt water, his chest carved open in the shape of a spiral. Before she could escape, they saw her. The cult dragged Clara to the altar, forcing her to kneel before the preserved corpse of Hale. Reverend Hale's eyes snapped open, milky white and glowing. His mouth stretched impossibly wide as he spoke in a voice that wasn't his own. "Bearer." The spiral on Clara's neck flared with pain, burning hotter than ever before. This time it didn't fade. Instead, it grew darker, deeper until it felt like a wound. One cultist handed her a ceremonial dagger. "Finish the ritual," they urged. "Claim your throne." Clara resisted, but her hand moved on its own, gripping the blade. As Clara stood over Hale's body, torn between resistance and surrender, Eleanor appeared, or rather something that looked like Eleanor. Her sister's form flickered between human and monstrous, her black eyes fixed on Clara. "Don't do it," Eleanor rasped. "If you kill him, you'll become the king's vessel. You'll drown everyone." But Hale's corpse laughed, his voice echoing through the chamber. Too late. The tide rises, the cycle continues. Clara hesitated, tears streaming down her face. Then she turned the dagger on herself. Instead of killing her, the dagger shattered the spiral on her neck. The room erupted in chaos as the cultists screamed, their marks bleeding profusely. Clara realized what she'd done. By breaking the ritual, she disrupted the cycle. But the Hollow King wasn't pleased. Water surged into the chamber, flooding the tunnels. Clara ran, pursued by the sound of crashing waves and unearthly roars. Above ground, the sea boiled, pulling the entire town toward the abyss. Clara reached the cliffs, where Eleanor waited. Together, they leapt into the churning waters. Underwater, Clara faced the Hollow King. Its form was indescribable, a writhing mass of shadows and coral, its presence suffocating. It offered her a choice: join it as its eternal host, or let Harrow Vale be consumed. Clara chose neither. Using the remnants of the dagger, she struck at the king's core, severing its connection to the mortal world. The sea calmed, and Harrow Vale was spared, but at a cost. Eleanor vanished, pulled into the depths. Clara washed ashore, unconscious but alive. When she awoke, the spiral was gone, replaced by a scar. Yet the whispers remained. Clara recorded one last episode of her podcast, warning others about the Hollow King. As she spoke, her reflection in the camera showed black eyes identical to Eleanor's. Months later, a fisherman found Clara's belongings on the cliffs. Her phone contained a final recording. "Tell them, the tide never truly recedes." Somewhere beneath the waves, the Hollow King stirred.